Nobody understood why the helicopter carrying a single civilian doctor received tighter security than the convoy carrying an entire battalion. The answer sat inside one locked briefcase resting at her feet, but no one on the landing zone knew that. By the end of the day, the people laughing at her would be desperately waiting for her next instruction. The rotor blade slowed as the aircraft settled onto the dusty landing pad of the remote training base. Soldiers hurried between tents, armored vehicles, and supply trucks. Medical teams prepared for a multinational disaster response exercise that had taken months to organize. The woman stepped down wearing plain field clothing with no military rank on her shoulders. Her identification badge simply read, Civilian Medical Consultant. Dr. Lara Voss carried herself without urgency, as though she had walked onto dozens of bases before. She thanked the flight crew, picked up her weathered medical bag, and quietly looked around the camp. Several younger medics noticed her. "That's a consultant?" One whispered. "She doesn't even look military." Another shrugged. "Maybe she's here to write reports." None of them noticed that a gray-haired sergeant standing nearby froze for just a second after reading her name. Before he could approach her, a convoy of command vehicles rolled into the staging area. Colonel Ronan Keir stepped out first. Tall, confident, and respected across several deployments, he had built a reputation for demanding excellence from everyone under his command. He believed mistakes on the battlefield cost lives, and he had little patience for outsiders who had never worn the uniform. His eyes landed on Alara. "You must be the civilian consultant." She offered a polite smile. "Dr. Alara Voss, it's a pleasure to be here." He glanced at her badge. "So you're evaluating our medical readiness." "That's correct." He folded his arms. "I've read the memo." His voice carried just enough volume for nearby officers and medics to hear. "Just remember something." The area grew noticeably quieter. "You are just a civilian." A few nervous smiles appeared among younger soldiers. Colonel Keir continued, "My people know how battlefield medicine works. Observe all you want, but stay out of military decisions." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Most people expected the visitor to defend herself. Instead, Alara simply nodded. "I understand your concern, Colonel." Her calm response somehow made the silence heavier. "I'll observe exactly as requested." The colonel gave one short nod. "Good." He turned and walked toward the command tent without another word. Several medics exchanged awkward looks. One quietly muttered, "That could have gone better." Another whispered, "I'd be angry." Alara wasn't. She calmly opened a notebook and began writing. Not about the conversation. About the base. She watched stretcher teams moving patients during the exercise setup. She timed how long each evacuation took. She counted how many steps separated the triage tent from the operating shelter. She noticed one radio operator repeating messages because of signal interference. She watched an ambulance reverse into a narrow lane that could easily become blocked during a real emergency. Nobody realized she was studying everything. Hours passed. The exercise officially began. Simulated casualties arrived in waves. Volunteer role players acted as injured civilians while military medics practiced triage, surgery preparation, and evacuation procedures. Alara never interrupted. She simply watched. Occasionally, she wrote another note. A young combat medic finally walked over during a short break. "Doctor?" She looked up. "Yes." "I noticed you've been writing nonstop." "I have." He smiled. "So, how are we doing?" She returned the smile. "You have talented people." His shoulders relaxed. "But..." She looked toward the evacuation route. "Your ambulance turnaround is averaging 48 seconds longer than it should." His smile faded. "You timed that." "I timed everything." He blinked. Nobody's ever done that before. She closed her notebook. Small delays become big problems. Before he could ask another question, an alarm sounded from the communications tent. The loudspeaker announced another stage of the exercise. Medical teams rushed back into position. Alara quietly stepped aside. Throughout the afternoon, something unusual kept happening. Older veterans occasionally glanced toward her with puzzled expressions. One master sergeant walked past twice before finally stopping. "Excuse me." She looked up. "Yes." "I feel like I've seen you somewhere." She smiled politely. I've worked in a lot of hospitals. He nodded slowly. No. His eyes narrowed as if chasing an old memory. Not a hospital. Before he could continue, another officer called his name. He hesitated, then walked away. Ilera watched him leave without saying a word. Late in the afternoon, Colonel Keir gathered senior staff inside the command tent. The exercise had gone well. Minor adjustments would be discussed before the final scenario began. Maps covered the large table. Medical officers debated evacuation routes. Engineers discussed bridge access. Logistics officers reviewed fuel supplies. Ilera sat quietly near the back. She listened more than she spoke. As one captain explained casualty transport, her eyes briefly moved toward the map. The western access road caught her attention. She looked at the bridge markings, then at the convoy schedule. Something didn't fit. She politely raised one hand. The room stopped. Colonel Keir looked at her. Yes, I may be mistaken. He waited. If multiple vehicles use the western crossing at once, your evacuation route could bottleneck. Several officers exchanged looks. One logistics major answered quickly. We've used that route before. Ilera nodded. I'm sure you have. She didn't argue. She simply pointed toward the narrow section highlighted on the map. If one disabled vehicle stops there, ambulances will lose valuable minutes. The colonel barely glanced at the map. We've already approved the route. Understood. We'll continue as planned. She closed her notebook again. Very well. The meeting ended. Outside, the evening sun dipped lower across the mountains. Convoys rolled into position for the exercise's final phase. Soldiers climbed aboard armored vehicles. Medical teams prepared fresh supplies. Pilots checked flight plans. Everything appeared routine. Then one of the gray-haired sergeants quietly approached another veteran medic. He kept his voice low. Do you remember Project Alder? The medic frowned. Why? I think that's a civilian. He looked toward Ilera, standing alone near the medical tents. I've seen her before. The other medic laughed softly. Impossible. Maybe, but if I'm right. Before he finished speaking, the ground suddenly trembled beneath everyone's feet. A deep boom echoed across the valley. Heads snapped toward the western convoy route. Then a frantic voice exploded over the emergency radio. This is Convoy 3. This is not exercise traffic. Repeat, this is not part of the exercise. We have multiple casualties. Immediate medical response required. The silence that followed the radio call lasted only a heartbeat, but everyone remembered it later. In that brief moment, the training exercise disappeared. Every person on the base understood they were facing a real emergency. Colonel Ronan Keir was already moving. Medical teams with me, ambulances now. Sirens came alive across the camp. Soldiers sprinted toward vehicles, while helicopter crews rushed through pre-flight checks. The relaxed pace of the exercise vanished, replaced by disciplined urgency. Dr. Ilera Voss grabbed her medical bag without waiting for instructions. She followed the stream of medics toward the casualty collection point, but stayed out of their way. Within minutes, the first ambulance arrived. Its doors opened, and exhausted medics began transferring injured soldiers onto waiting stretchers. 3 more behind us, one medic shouted. We've still got people trapped at the convoy. Doctors and nurses immediately spread out. Take this one to trauma 1. I need oxygen here. Blood pressure dropping. The organized exercise had become a crowded maze of voices, wheels, radios, and running boots. Colonel Keir stood in the center, directing teams as patients continued arriving. We stay with protocol, he ordered. Primary triage first. Surgery only after full assessment. Everyone obeyed. For several minutes, the system worked. Then more ambulances appeared. And then more. The number of casualties doubled. Inside the medical tent, every bed filled. Outside, stretchers lined the gravel. One nurse looked around anxiously. We're out of monitored beds. Another answered, use recovery cots. They're already full. The pressure grew with every passing minute. Ilera quietly watched the flow of patients. Her eyes never stopped moving. She wasn't looking only at the injuries. She was watching movement. Who waited, who crossed paths, who repeated the same task twice, who stood still because nobody had assigned them. A young lieutenant hurried toward Colonel Keir. "Sir, we're losing time. Ambulances are backing up." "We'll clear them. Our triage line has stalled." "We stay with procedure." The lieutenant nodded and ran off. Ilera looked toward the entrance. She counted silently. 1, 2, 3. A stretcher stopped because another blocked the narrow passage. 4, 5. 2 nurses searched for supplies stored on opposite sides of the tent. 6. A surgeon walked across the treatment area just to retrieve equipment that should have been beside him. She closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she walked calmly toward the colonel. "Colonel." He barely looked at her. "I'm busy. I know." He continued issuing orders. She waited until he finished. "I believe your patient flow is collapsing." He frowned. "We're managing. You won't be in another 4 minutes." One nearby captain looked at her. "What makes you say that?" She pointed toward the entrance, the bottleneck, then toward the operating area. "Your critical patients are crossing paths with walking wounded." She looked toward the pharmacy table. "Essential supplies are too far from treatment." The captain glanced around. For the first time, he noticed she was right. Still, Colonel Keir shook his head. "This isn't the time to redesign the hospital. It will soon become impossible to move inside. We follow military protocol." Ilera answered softly. "Protocols work until conditions change." He stepped closer. "I appreciate your concern, Doctor." His voice remained controlled. "But my people know what they're doing." She held his gaze for a moment. "I never questioned their skill." "Then let them work." She gave a small nod and stepped back again. Another ambulance arrived. Then another. Radio traffic became constant. 6 additional casualties inbound. "We need another trauma team." Patient deteriorating during transport. Inside the tent, frustration began replacing confidence. A medic accidentally collided with another stretcher. An orderly searched for missing equipment. Someone called for plasma that had already been delivered to the wrong station. The delays grew longer, not because people lacked skill, because the system itself had become overloaded. Captain Ilian Dorn hurried toward the colonel again. "Sir, what is it?" "We got 2 critical patients waiting because both surgical teams are occupied. They'll have to wait. They may not have time." Colonel Keir's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, another senior physician approached. "We're running out of room." The colonel looked across the tent. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Ilera quietly opened her notebook. She tore out 1 page. Across it, she had drawn a simple layout of the treatment area, only hours earlier. She walked over without a word. "If these stations move," she said, placing the paper on the table, "you create 2 independent treatment lanes." Nobody spoke. She continued. "Critical patients enter here." Her finger traced 1 route. Walking wounded go around the opposite side. Another line. Move supplies beside treatment instead of across the tent. She looked toward the nurses. Assign 1 runner instead of 6. The room remained silent. Captain Dorn stared at the sketch. This would eliminate crossing traffic. Another surgeon leaned over. "And free operating access." A logistics officer whispered, "We could reorganize this in 3 minutes." Colonel Keir looked at the page. "It isn't standard." "No," Ilera replied. "It isn't." Before anyone could continue, an emergency physician rushed inside. "We got 3 patients crashing at once." Every head turned. The doctor added 1 sentence that changed everything. "We can't keep up." Silence settled over the command table. Colonel Keir looked around the crowded tent. He saw medics waiting for equipment, patients waiting for transport, doctors waiting for space. Every delay stacked upon the next. Captain Dorn spoke carefully. "Sir." The colonel didn't answer. The captain continued. "We need another option." At that exact moment, the base commander entered the tent after returning from the accident site. His uniform was covered with dust. He took 1 look around and immediately understood. "Status?" Colonel Keir answered honestly. "We're reaching capacity." The commander noticed a sketch lying on the table. Whose plan is that? Nobody answered for a second. Then Captain Dorn pointed toward Alara, the civilian consultant. The commander looked at her. You designed this? Yes. Can it work? I've used systems like it before. The commander studied her face. There was no panic, no hesitation, only quiet confidence. He made his decision. Do it. Colonel Keir turned sharply. Sir, with respect. The commander interrupted him. We're out of time. He looked directly at every medic in the room. Effective immediately, everyone follows Dr. Voss's treatment layout. The tent fell completely silent. Some of the older medics exchanged stunned glances. One of them whispered under his breath, almost too quietly for anyone else to hear. That's not just a new layout. Another veteran slowly shook his head. No. His eyes remained fixed on Alara. I've seen this system before. But that protocol was classified. The words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. That protocol was classified. Several people heard the whisper, but only a few understood what it meant. Most of the younger medics kept working, moving stretchers, preparing equipment, and following the new layout that Dr. Alara Voss had designed in less than a minute. The changes took effect almost immediately. Instead of patients crossing paths, 2 separate treatment lanes formed naturally. Supplies reached doctors without delay. Nurses stopped searching for equipment because everything they needed was within arm's reach. The chaos did not disappear, but became organized. Colonel Ronan Keir stood near the center of the tent, watching the flow of people. He hated admitting it, even to himself, but the civilian system was working. Captain Ilian Dorn walked beside him. Our waiting time has already dropped. Keir glanced toward the entrance. How much? Nearly half. And surgery? They've started the next cases without interruption. The colonel looked across the tent again. Dr. Voss wasn't giving loud orders. She simply moved from station to station. Sometimes she adjusted where supplies were placed. Sometimes she quietly asked a nurse, "Can you move those monitors 2 feet to the left?" Other times she simply watched. She noticed things before anyone else did. When one treatment station began slowing down, she redirected 2 medics before anyone asked for help. When another area became crowded, she shifted incoming patients to neighboring lane without disrupting the entire operation. She never raised her voice. Yet people naturally listened. One young combat medic finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "Doctor, have you done this before?" She smiled gently. "A few times." He laughed nervously. "It doesn't feel like just a few." Before she could answer, another medic called for assistance, and she was already moving. Across the tent, 2 older veterans exchanged uneasy looks. Master Sergeant Corwin Hale leaned toward retired habits he thought he'd forgotten. He watched Alara's hand signals, the way she prioritized patients, even the exact words she used. His expression slowly changed. He walked over to another gray-haired medic. "Tell me I'm imagining this." The medic kept watching Alara. "I wish I could." Corwin lowered his voice. "She organizes a field exactly the same way. The spacing, the rotations, the color sequence." The other medic nodded. "Even the verbal cues." Corwin swallowed. "That system vanished years ago. So, did the person who designed it?" Neither man spoke again. Instead, they continued watching her. Meanwhile, Colonel Keir found himself growing more unsettled. Success should have reassured him. Instead, it raised questions. He approached Captain Dorn. "Background check. On Dr. Voss?" "Everything." The file was already sent. "I want more." Dorn hesitated. "Sir, there isn't much." "What do you mean?" "Medical school. Disaster response. International consulting. After that," he shrugged, "the record becomes unusually thin." Keir frowned. "Nobody has a career that disappears for almost 10 years. Apparently she does." The colonel looked toward Alara again. She had just comforted a frightened young soldier while calmly explaining every step of treatment. There was something familiar about the confidence she carried. Not arrogance, experience, the kind earned over many years. Later that evening, as the final casualties were stabilized, The pressure inside the medical tents finally eased. Exhausted medics sat wherever they found space. Some leaned against supply crates. Others quietly drank water without speaking. The emergency had not been easy, but far more people had been stabilized than anyone believed possible. Colonel Keir walked outside. The cool evening air replaced the heat inside the tents. Captain Dorn joined him. "You were right." Keir looked at him. "About what?" "We needed her." The colonel remained silent. Across the base, Alara sat alone on a folding chair, writing once again inside her notebook. Not about herself. Not about the praise. She wrote observations, lessons, small improvements for future emergencies. A shadow stopped beside her. She looked up. Master Sergeant Corwin Hale stood there. His face showed careful respect. "Doctor, Sergeant." He studied her for a long moment. "Were you ever stationed at Black Ridge Training Center?" She closed her notebook. "No." "Were you attached to Northern Command?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Did you ever work with Special Medical Development?" She looked directly into his eyes. "I'm afraid I can't answer that." His heartbeat seemed to pause. That wasn't a denial. Before he could ask another question, footsteps approached from behind. An elderly man wearing civilian clothes entered the medical area, carrying a small overnight bag. Despite his age, every passing officer greeted him with quiet respect. Several doctors immediately recognized him. "Professor Arden? What is he doing here? He retired years ago." The elderly surgeon had been called to advise after hearing about the emergency through military channels. His sharp eyes scanned the treatment area. Then they stopped. "On Alara." He froze. His overnight bag nearly slipped from his hand. She slowly stood. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, the old surgeon smiled. "I wonder if I'd ever see you again." Some nearby medics looked at one another in confusion. Alara returned the smile. "It's been a long time." "It has." Colonel Keir noticed the exchange and walked over. "You know each other?" Professor Arden chuckled softly. "Know her?" He looked almost offended by the question. "I owe part of my career to her." Complete silence surrounded them. The colonel frowned. "I'm sorry, what?" The professor looked around at the younger medical staff. "I suppose none of you would recognize the name." He turned back toward Alara. "You always preferred it that way." Alara quietly shook her head. "This isn't the place." "No," he agreed. "It probably isn't." Colonel Keir stepped closer. "Professor, who is she?" The elderly surgeon looked from the colonel to Alara, silently asking permission. She didn't answer. She simply looked away. The professor chose his words carefully. Years ago, the military faced survival rates that were far lower than they should have been. Everyone listened. A small research team was formed. Very few people knew it existed. The techniques developed there changed battlefield medicine forever. Captain Dorn frowned. "I've studied military medical history. I've never heard of that team." "You weren't supposed to." The professor smiled sadly. Most of the records were sealed. Colonel Keir's eyes slowly shifted toward Alara. "And she was part of it?" The old surgeon gave a quiet laugh. "No, Colonel." Another long pause followed. Then he said the words that left everyone speechless. "She wasn't part of the team. She led it." Before anyone could ask another question, emergency alarms suddenly echoed across the base once again. A rescue vehicle skidded to a stop outside the medical tent. A breathless engineer jumped out and shouted, "The damaged bridge has collapsed, and our rescue crew is trapped underneath it." No one had time to react to Professor's revelation before the next emergency took control of the entire base. "The rescue crew is trapped." The engineer's voice echoed across the medical tent. They were inspecting the damaged bridge when the remaining support gave way. "We have people pinned under debris." Colonel Ronan Keir was already moving. "Search and rescue with me. Engineers, bring stabilization equipment. Medical teams, prepare for field treatment." Within seconds, trucks and emergency vehicles raced toward the bridge. Dust followed behind them as the convoy left the camp. Dr. Lara Voss climbed into one of the rescue vehicles without saying a word. Colonel Keir noticed. "You don't have to come." She looked at him calmly. "If they're trapped, they'll need treatment before they can be moved." The area may not be stable. I know. There was no hesitation in her voice. The colonel gave a short nod. Let's go. The bridge stood across a narrow valley less than 15 minutes away. When the convoy arrived, the scene was tense but controlled. One section of the old concrete crossing had collapsed into a shallow embankment. Large pieces of broken pavement rested at dangerous angles. Engineers had already begun checking what remained of the structure. A rescue officer hurried toward Colonel Keir. We confirmed 5 people underneath. Condition? Unknown. Can we reach them? Not safely yet. The officer pointed towards several cracked support beams. If we moved the wrong section, the rest could shift. Everyone fell quiet. Every decision mattered. Ilera walked slowly around the edge of the collapse, studying the ground instead of the debris. She watched where dust continued to fall. She noticed tiny movements in loose gravel. She listened to the engineers discussing weight distribution. Then she stopped beside the lead engineer. Which support concerns you most? He pointed toward a fractured concrete column. If that slides, everything above it moves. She nodded. What if access comes from the drainage side instead? The engineer looked at her. That tunnel? Yes. It's narrow, but stable. He studied it again. After several seconds, he smiled. I didn't even consider that. Colonel Keir joined them. What are you thinking? Ilera pointed toward the drainage channel running beneath one edge of the bridge. It avoids the unstable section. The engineer nodded. We could send a small rescue team through there. It'll be slow, but possible. Keir looked between them. Do it. Minutes later, a carefully selected rescue team prepared to enter the confined space. Ilera picked up a compact medical pack. The colonel frowned. You're staying here. She looked toward the tunnel entrance. They'll need medical decisions inside. We have military medics. You do, she answered gently. But they'll also need someone coordinating treatment before extraction begins. He hesitated. The rescue officer spoke first. She has a point. The engineer added, space is limited. Every movement has to count. Colonel Keir looked at Ilera. You understand the risks? I do. He exhaled slowly. Then you were the first team. The tunnel was barely tall enough to crawl through. Flashlights cut through the darkness as rescuers carefully worked their way beneath the damaged bridge. Dust floated through the beams of light. Nobody rushed. Every movement was deliberate. After several yards, one rescuer called quietly, I've got visual. 5 trapped crew members were visible between broken concrete slabs. They were awake, tired, frightened, but alive. One engineer tried to smile. I was starting to think nobody could reach us. Ilera knelt beside him. We're here now. Her voice remained steady. We're going to do this one step at a time. She quickly assessed each person while rescue specialists evaluated the debris. Instead of trying to move everyone immediately, she spoke with the rescue leader. If you free the side first, the pressure shifts. He nodded. I see it. Start with the far end. Another trapped worker whispered, Is the bridge going to fall? Ilera looked directly at him. I won't promise what I can't control. He swallowed. She continued, But I promise nobody is leaving you alone. His shoulders relaxed. Outside, heavy lifting equipment waited. Inside, rescue workers followed her sequence exactly. One by one, trapped crew members were carefully freed without disturbing the unstable structure. Colonel Keir watched from the entrance. He noticed something unexpected. Nobody inside argued. Nobody competed to give orders. Ilera never acted like she was in charge. Yet every rescuer naturally looked toward her before making difficult decisions. Captain Ilian Dorn quietly stepped beside the colonel. They trust her. Keir nodded. I noticed. They don't even know her. No. The colonel kept watching. But somehow they do. Nearly 2 hours passed. The final trapped worker remained pinned beneath a cracked support beam. Engineers debated several options. None looked safe. One young rescuer whispered nervously, If we lift too fast, everything shifts. Silence followed. Ilera crouched beside the injured man. What do you do? She asked. He blinked. I'm an engineer. Good. She smiled softly. Then help us. He looked confused. She pointed toward the damage beam. You know how this structure wants to move. Despite the pain and exhaustion, he slowly studied the concrete around him. After a long moment, he quietly said, "Not upward." Everyone listened. He pointed weakly. "Rotate it just a little." The lead engineer outside heard the suggestion over the radio. His eyes widened. That could actually work. Very slowly, the rescue crew adjusted their equipment. The beam rotated only a few inches. The trapped worker slid free. A wave of relief spread through the tunnel. One by one, every rescue worker emerged into the evening light. Applause broke out among the waiting soldiers. Several exhausted engineers embraced one another. Colonel Keir walked toward Alara. His uniform was dusty. So was hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "I was wrong." She looked at him. "I judged you before I knew you." She smiled. "It happens." "No." He shook his head. "It shouldn't." Before either could continue, a convoy of black government vehicles rolled onto the site. Every nearby military police officer immediately stood straighter. The first vehicle stopped. A senior defense official stepped out. He looked around until his eyes found Alara. Without hesitation, he walked directly toward her. Then, in front of the entire rescue team, he extended his hand. "It's good to see you again, Doctor." The area fell completely silent. The official turned toward Colonel Keir and the assembled officers. "There is something all of you deserve to know." Every eye remained fixed on him as he prepared to reveal the truth that had been hidden for years. Every conversation stopped as a senior defense official faced the exhausted rescue teams. Dust still hung in the evening air, and the damaged bridge stood silently behind them. The official looked at Dr. Alara Voss for a brief moment, almost asking permission without speaking. She gave the smallest nod. He turned toward the officers. "Many of you know the battlefield medical system you've been trained to use over the years." Several heads nodded. What most of you do not know is that many of its most important principles came from one person. His eyes settled on Alara, Dr. Alara Voss. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed quieter. Colonel Ronan Keir looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. The official continued. "Years ago, Dr. Voss led a research program that brought together military physicians, civilian trauma specialists, engineers, and emergency responders. Their goal was simple: help more people survive before they ever reached a hospital." He paused. The program succeeded beyond expectations. Captain Ilian Dorn frowned. "Then why has no one heard her name?" The official smiled gently. "Because she asked for it." Several people exchanged confused looks. Professor Arden stepped forward. Every report, every publication, every recommendation carried the names of younger doctors instead. He looked proudly at Alara. She believed recognition should go to the people still serving in the field. One of the younger medics whispered to another, "She gave away the credit?" Professor Arden heard him. Again and again. The defense official nodded. She also declined several national honors. Colonel Keir finally found his voice. "Why?" Everyone looked toward Alara. She answered quietly, "A metal doesn't stop bleeding." Nobody laughed. She continued, "If someone returns home because a better system saved them, that's enough." The words settled over the rescue site. They sounded simple, but no one could mistake how deeply she believed them. Later that evening, the rescued engineers and soldiers were brought back to the base after medical evaluations. Most had only minor injuries, but every one of them understood how close the day had come to ending differently. The atmosphere inside the medical tent had changed completely. The same young medics who had wondered why a civilian consultant had arrived now watched Alara with quiet respect. One young nurse approached her while organizing supplies. "Doctor?" "Yes." "I wanted to thank you." Alara smiled. "You did the hard work." The nurse shook her head. "I've never seen a team move like that. You made us better." Alara gently closed the supply case she had been checking. "No." She pointed around the room. "You trusted each other. That's what made the difference." Across the tent, Several rescued soldiers sat together drinking water after their evaluations. One of them slowly stood and walked toward her. He looked no older than 25. My daughter turns 3 next month. Alara listened quietly. I almost missed her first birthday during my last deployment. His voice caught for a second. I wasn't sure I'd see this one. He held out his hand. Thank you. She accepted the handshake. I'm glad you're going home. Another soldier joined him. Then another. Soon a small line formed. None of them wanted photographs. None asked for autographs. They simply wanted to say thank you. Colonel Keir watched every conversation from across the tent. Each thank you made the weight on his shoulders feel heavier. Finally, he walked toward her. The room gradually became quiet. He stopped only a few feet away. I owe you something. She looked up. You don't owe me anything. Yes. He took a slow breath. I judge your title instead of your experience. No one interrupted. He continued. I assumed wearing a uniform meant I understood more than someone who didn't. His voice remained steady, but the regret behind it was impossible to miss. I was wrong. The entire medical team listened. I almost ignored advice that helped save lives today. He looked directly into her eyes. I'm sorry. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Alara smiled. The important thing is that you listened before it was too late. He gave a small nod. I'll remember that. So will I. There was no bitterness in her voice, only honesty. The following morning, the base gathered for a short closing ceremony. No speeches had originally been planned, but after everything that had happened, the commander believed one moment deserved recognition. The soldiers assembled in neat formation. Medical teams stood together. Engineers lined up beside them. The defense officials stepped to the front. We often celebrate courage. He looked across the formation. We also celebrate leadership. His eyes found Alara. But today we recognize something just as important. He paused. Humility. The commander invited Alara to stand beside him. She looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. He smiled knowingly. I realize you never wanted ceremonies. A few people laughed softly. But sometimes gratitude deserves witnesses. The commander turned toward the assembled troops. Attention! Hundreds of boots struck the ground at once. Then came the command. Salute. Colonel Ronan Keir raised his hand first. Every soldier followed. Every medic. Every engineer. Every officer. No one had been ordered to do it for her specifically. They did it because they wanted to. Alara looked across the formation. For the first time all week, emotion reached her eyes. Not because of the salute, because she recognized many of the faces. The young medic who had asked about her notebook. The frightened engineer rescued from beneath the bridge. The nurse who had thanked her. The soldiers who would soon return to their families. That was what mattered. Nothing else. A helicopter waited near the landing zone later that afternoon. Its engine idled quietly as Alara carried the same weathered medical bag she had arrived with. No medals, no trophy, no celebration following behind her. Professor Arden walked beside her. You could stay. She smiled. They don't need me anymore. They might. They'll do fine. Colonel Keir approached one last time. I hope our paths cross again. She extended her hand. They probably will. He shook it firmly. And next time, a faint smile crossed his face. I won't make the mistake of judging the badge before the person wearing it. She nodded. That's a lesson worth keeping. As the helicopter lifted into the afternoon sky, dozens of soldiers remained standing below, watching until it disappeared beyond the mountains. Only after it vanished did Captain Dorn quietly say what many have been thinking all along. The greatest heroes aren't always the ones everyone knows. Colonel Keir kept his eyes on the empty horizon. No, they're often the ones who never asked to be remembered,